Hi, Cora Stack here, Dr. Stack. I wanted to look at the whole idea of pluralism because it's very much central to Article 12, and I've been thinking about it and how to sort of highlight, what's happened to pluralism in the 2025 presidential election. So, the title of this video here is Ireland's presidential election blind spot: how Article 12 fails democratic pluralism. So, the President of Ireland is meant to stand above party politics. But what if the process that selects the President is quietly controlled and no one is allowed to question it once the election is over? The process now, the process. This video examines Article 12 of Bunreacht and hÉireann exposes a constitutional blind spot, a democratic failure that occurs before the public ever votes and cannot be answered after the vote is cast. All alleged, of course. This is not about any individual president. It's about process, pluralism and constitutional integrity. Article 12 is one of the most detailed provisions in the Irish Constitution. It carefully designs the presidency as directly elected by the people, removed from executive power, insulated from party dominance. But critically, Article 12 begins its democratic work before polling day. It creates two equal nomination routes: nomination by members of the National Parliament, the Oireachtas, nomination by local authorities. These are not symbolic, they are parallel constitutional pathways designed to guarantee pluralism and access. Why the local authority route matters. The parliamentary route is structurally shaped by party discipline. This is a political reality. The local authority route exists to counterbalance that reality. Councillors are elected by communities, constitutionally empowered, particularly with regard to the election. Absolutely. Once the presidential order has been issued, they are constitutionally empowered, meant to exercise personal judgment, not party instruction. The route embeds local democratic sovereignty into a national constitutional office. That's once the presidential order is issued. When it functions, it ensures that civic candidates, independent public servants, non-elite voices can reach the national ballot. When pluralism fails in practice, that was about 20. How many people were involved in that, in that category? 20 or so, more. When pluralism fails in practice, no presidential candidate has successfully managed emerge through the local authority route in this election, 2025. This is not neutral. It raises a constitutional question. Is a constitutional pathway still real if it never operates? Once the presidential order is issued, the election, this is the important thing now, the election belongs to the Constitution and the people, not the political parties. So let me say that again. Once the presidential order is issued, this is now by the minister because there's only 15 ministers. They all have too much to do, if you ask me. I can say now why there's need for more ministers at the cabinet table. Certainly there is, absolutely. There needs to be more ministers because 15 is still, I can't believe it. It's unbelievable that it's the same number since 1937. It's just unbelievable. Once the presidential order is issued, the election belongs critically, number one, to the Constitution, and number two, to the people, not to the political parties. Let's go over that again now. Once the presidential order is issued, the election belongs, number one, to the Constitution, number two, to the people, and number three, not to the political parties. Any instruction, pressure, or coordination that interferes with councillors' constitutional direction after that point has no legal authority. When pluralism is blocked at nomination stage, the election is already narrowed before the public votes. The constitutional blind spot. Here lies the problem. Article 12 protects the president after election, but provides no mechanism, as is currently constituted, to examine the constitutionality of the election process once it is over. This creates a paradox. An election may be procedurally flawed, yet democratically compromised. The Constitution at the moment prioritises finality of outcome over scrutiny of process. This is not a safeguard. This is the way it happened this year. The Constitution prioritises finality because it allowed what happened to happen. This is not a safeguard, it is a blind spot. And I believe this is the first time this has been identified as a huge issue for the separation of powers. Who is responsible for protecting the process? This is the key question. In a constitutional democracy, responsibility is shared. The Attorney General is the guardian of the constitutional process. Government departments must issue clear, constitutionally accurate guidance. Local authority executives must respect councillors' independence, and political parties must recognise the limit of their influence. When everyone remains silent, unconstitutional practices persist. Why this matters for a democracy? Democracy is not just about voting. It's about real choice, open access, fair process. If candidates are filtered out before the public is consulted, the vote cannot repair the loss. Pluralism is not a slogan. It's a practical constitutional requirement. So what is the constitutional challenge? This is not about revisiting an election. It's about recognising a structural failure that remains unexamined to date. A democracy does not erode through scrutiny. It erodes through silence. If constitutional pathways can be interfered with and then sealed off from an examination by time itself, then democratic accountability is suspended. This is the challenge exposed by Article 12, and it cannot be ignored without cost. So that's another. That's looking at it from the perspective of pluralism and the impact on pluralism of what happened in this election, and where you have the serious constitutional blind spot and the implications then. Huge implications for separation of powers. Literally collapses after that, or has collapsed in this case. So there's a major issue there. That's a major issue. So I can't believe that I was in the whole flag on the eve of the election, and then my case was classified as entirely baseless. For the whole press to destroy my reputation, and then. This is actually what was going on, and I believe this is not unique to Ireland. So this is a regular. This happens. This all the language that was used, the reframing allegedly. This is just standard language that's used. In these kind of cases, there is a huge reluctance to interfere with elections. Now, in Ireland, we have a particular constitution, and there is a constitutionally blind spot as a result of the way the constitution is designed, and so there's a design failure here. But there's more than a design failure. There's a huge reluctance to interfere. One, particularly the ballots, or the ballot papers, and all that stuff. The thing gets the whole election process gets moving. There's a huge reluctance by courts, and this would not be unique to Ireland. But what the Irish case has demonstrated is a huge structural problem currently in the Irish Constitution, which we're calling the constitutional blind spot. But it really is a failure of the separation of powers at the moment. And it could easily happen again. You could have a situation where in a further election, elected process could be severely compromised, and then there'd be all these delay tactics, avoidance tactics, and then the election would go ahead, and nothing could be done to examine the legitimacy or the constitutionality of the process itself. So that in itself is a major constitutional problem that remains unresolved.